The signal. A silent cry for help that changed everything. The bus rumbled softly as it rolled through Chicago's busy streets on a late afternoon. The rain had just stopped, leaving streaks of water smeared across the windows. The scent of worn leather seats mixed with the dampness of passengers' wet coats, along with a faint trace of fast food someone had brought on board. Noah, 14, sat in the middle row, earbuds in but with no music playing. He only pretended to listen to avoid conversation. Like every other day, this was just another ordinary bus ride home after school, the same route. The same familiar faces, the same sluggish traffic outside the window. He rested his head against the glass, staring blankly outside, letting his thoughts drift along with the water pooling on the pavement. Just like always, nothing unusual happened, until something made him snap to attention. It wasn't the bus braking suddenly or someone's phone ringing. It was a vague, inexplicable feeling of unease. Noah instinctively looked toward the front, and that was when he saw her. Seated by the window in the first row, a girl about his age sat motionless. She wasn't on her phone, nor was she gazing out the window like most passengers. She simply sat there, back straight, hands resting on her lap, fingers clenched so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. That wasn't normal. Beside her, a man sat closer than necessary. He wore a gray hoodie, the hood pulled low, obscuring part of his face. He wasn't speaking to her, but his posture, the way he leaned slightly toward her, his hand resting uncomfortably close but not quite touching, set off alarm bells in Noah's mind. He swallowed hard. Maybe she was just having a bad day? Maybe the man was her father or uncle? But then Noah realized what had unsettled him from the very start. Her hands were trembling, and then, she raised one. At first glance, it seemed like an absent-minded movement. But Noah stared, his heartbeat hammering as he recognized it wasn't just some random gesture. She lifted her right hand to chest level, tucked her thumb into her palm, and quickly folded her 4 fingers over it, concealing the thumb. Noah froze. He had seen this signal before, on a TikTok video. It was a silent plea for help. Noah felt his heart pounding harder than usual. He blinked, looking again to make sure he wasn't imagining things. The girl had just given the distress signal. But, could he be mistaken? Could it have just been an unconscious movement? He watched more closely. She remained still, her expression blank, not looking at anyone, not making any other unusual movements, except for her hands. And Noah noticed they were trembling. The man beside her still hadn't spoken. But something about the way he sat too close, the way his arm nearly touched hers, made the air around them feel thick with invisible tension. Noah swallowed hard. Maybe he was her father or uncle. Maybe he was just a family member taking her home after a long day. But then Noah's eyes landed on her wrist. The man was holding it. Not tightly, not obviously, but just firm enough to keep her within his reach. No, this wasn't her father or uncle. A chill ran down Noah's spine. He glanced around the bus, hoping someone else had noticed. But no one had. The woman sitting across from them was too absorbed in her phone to see anything. An older man behind them was nodding off. The driver was focused on the road. No one noticed. No one paid attention. Only Noah. He turned back to the girl. And then, she did it again. Faster this time. More deliberately. Thumb tucked into her palm. Fingers folding over it. There was no doubt anymore. She was asking for help. Noah felt his breath grow heavy. What was he supposed to do? He could ignore it. Pretend he hadn't seen anything. He could get off at the next stop and go home. As if nothing had happened. But if he did, if she really was in danger, what then? What if she was forced off the bus and disappeared forever? He couldn't let that happen. He had to help her. But how? He was just a 14-year-old kid. And the man looked bigger. Older, dangerous. Noah took a deep breath. He had an idea. His fingers quickly unlocked his phone, scrolling to his messaging app. His hands trembled as he typed 3 numbers. 911. He only had one chance to do this right. No mistakes. No panic. His fingers moved swiftly over the screen, typing out the message. I'm on bus 17 in Chicago. There's a girl at the front giving the distress signal. She's with a man in a hoodie. He just grabbed her wrist. I think she's in danger. Noah swallowed. Should he send it? What if this was all a misunderstanding? What if the police came and it turned out to be her relative? What if he was just overreacting? But then, the girl looked at him. Just for a fleeting second. Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw real fear. Noah didn't hesitate. He hit send. The moment the message was sent, Noah felt his heart pounding so hard it seemed loud enough to be heard. The screen showed a confirmation checkmark. The message had gone through. Now, all he could do was wait. But waiting in this moment felt like pure agony. Noah forced himself to stay calm, eyes still fixed forward, but he didn't dare look directly at the girl anymore. He was afraid the man might notice. The man remained still, his hand gripping the girl's wrist, his eyes staring straight ahead. But something in his posture made Noah uneasy. He was on alert. Noah stole a quick glance around. No one on the bus had any idea what was happening. The woman nearby was still glued to her phone. A young man with headphones behind them was drumming his fingers to the beat of his music. The bus driver, focused on the congested street ahead, had no idea that just a few feet behind him, a girl was silently pleading for help. Noah clenched his phone tighter. He had done the right thing. The police were on their way. They would help her. His phone buzzed. A response from 911 flashed on the screen. Emergency services have received your report. A patrol unit is on the way. Stay safe and do not intervene directly. A small wave of relief washed over Noah. They were coming. But then, he looked up, and his stomach dropped. The man was getting suspicious. His gaze moved slowly across the bus, scanning each passenger, as if searching for whoever had noticed something they shouldn't have. Noah quickly lowered his head, pretending to scroll through his phone. But his heartbeat pounded in his ears, loud and frantic. He couldn't let the man figure it out. He couldn't let him know that help was coming. A quick glance at the girl. She was still sitting motionless, but her hands were clenched tightly on her lap. She had noticed the shift in the man's demeanor. She knew he was getting cautious. The bus began to slow down. Noah blinked, his eyes darting to the window. A bus stop was coming up. His breath hitched. What if the man decided to drag her off the bus right now? The police weren't here yet. If she stepped off with him, she would disappear. Noah couldn't let that happen. He had to do something. He had to stall for time. But how? Noah felt his blood racing as the bus slowed. The stop was right ahead. And if the man dragged the girl off now, it could all be over. The police weren't here yet. He knew that. He knew he couldn't just wait. If he didn't act now, she would disappear forever. But he couldn't be reckless. If he jumped up and shouted, "This guy is a kidnapper," the man could panic. He could get violent. The girl could get hurt. Things could spiral out of control. Noah needed a smarter way. A way to stall. To throw the man off guard. He took a deep breath and stood up. Moving casually, he walked toward the front of the bus as if looking for a new seat. But in reality, he had only one goal: to get closer to the girl and the man. He stopped just beside them, pretending to suddenly recognize her. "Hey, aren't you Haley?" The girl flinched, her eyes widening in surprise. Then Noah saw it, the flicker of realization in her gaze. She understood. She blinked once, as if silently confirming she got the message. Noah kept going, trying to make his voice sound as natural as possible. "Haley, you remember me, right? We had science class together last year." Her lips pressed together. Then she gave a quick nod. "Oh, right." Her voice was small, unsteady, but at least she was playing along. Immediately, the man tensed. He turned to Noah, his eyes sharp as knives. "Who's this?" His voice was low, rough, dangerous. Noah swallowed but forced himself to smile. "Oh, just an old classmate, right, Haley?" She nodded again, weaker this time. The man narrowed his eyes. Slowly, he said, "Yeah? What school?" Noah froze. He hadn't thought that far. He had no idea what school she went to. If he said the wrong one, the man would know. But before he could answer, a siren wailed outside. Red and blue lights flashed against the bus windows. Noah's heart leapt to his throat. "They're here." The driver's radio crackled to life. "Police are requesting the bus be held at the next stop." The man went rigid. Noah saw his grip tighten on the girl's wrist. He knew something was wrong. His eyes darted around the bus, his breathing quickening. He was calculating. Run? Drag her with him? Fight back? Noah didn't know what the man would do. He only knew one thing. He wasn't getting away. The man's grip tightened around the girl's wrist, his fingers digging deep into her skin. Noah saw her flinch. her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to cry out, but she held it back. He knew. He knew the police were here. He knew his time was running out. But he wasn't giving up. Noah could see it, the gears in his head turning, searching for a way out. His eyes flicked toward the bus doors, scanning the traffic outside, then back at the girl. He was calculating. And then, he made his decision. He yanked her up. "Let's go." His voice was low, controlled, but Noah could hear the tension behind it. The girl stumbled as he pulled her forward, nearly tripping over her own feet. Noah's pulse spiked. No, she can't leave the bus. If she stepped through that door, she might never be found again. He had to do something. Now. Noah lunged forward, blocking their path. "Wait." His voice wavered, but it was loud enough to make heads turn. The man snapped toward him, eyes flashing with something dark and dangerous. "What do you want?" he growled, his grip on the girl unwavering. Noah swallowed hard, forcing himself to stand his ground. He needed a reason to keep them here, an excuse that wouldn't set the man off right away. Thinking fast, he looked at the girl and pretended to suddenly remember something. "Hey, Haley, you still owe me that book from last year," he blurted. "Remember? The one about space? I lent it to you. And you never gave it back." The girl blinked in confusion. Then, understanding flickered in her eyes. "Oh, right." She latched onto the lie instantly, her voice shaking but playing along. I meant to return it. But." The man's grip on her wrist tightened. He was catching on. Noah's heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. And then, a voice cut through the air. "Police! Hands off the girl, now!" Officers stormed onto the bus. The man froze. No way out. But would he surrender? Or would he run? The air on the bus was frozen solid. The man's grip tightened around the girl's wrist, his knuckles turning white, but his eyes weren't on Noah anymore. They were locked onto the officers now advancing down the aisle. Two of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a firm stance and a sharp-eyed female officer moving swiftly, hands hovering near their belts where their holstered weapons rested. "Let her go. Now." The male officer's voice was calm but commanding, carrying an authority that made the entire bus fall silent. The man didn't move. Noah could practically see the wheels turning in his head, run or fight. The girl sucked in a shaky breath, on the verge of breaking down. The officer took another step closer, his voice even firmer. "I won't say it again. Let her go." A second, 2 seconds. The entire bus held its breath. And then, he did the last thing anyone expected. He yanked her forward, trying to drag her toward the exit. But the female officer was faster. In a flash, she lunged, gripping his wrist and twisting it back. "Let her go." The man roared, thrashing, but the male officer was already on him. With practiced precision, he grabbed the man's other arm, forcing him down against the seat. The man writhed like a cornered animal, snarling through clenched teeth. "Let me go." But within seconds, a sharp click echoed through the bus. Handcuffs snapped around his wrists. "You're under arrest for attempted abduction," the male officer said coldly. The man thrashed once more, but it was over. He had lost. And then, the girl collapsed onto the seat, gasping for air. Noah watched her hands tremble as if she still couldn't believe she had been saved. The female officer knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." The girl clenched her hands into fists, her eyes red and glassy. And then, finally, the tears fell. Not loud, uncontrollable sobs, but small, choked cries, as if she had been holding back this fear for far too long. Noah let out a long breath. He had done the right thing. But one question still lingered in his mind. Who was this man? And worse, if Noah hadn't called the police, what would have happened to her? The bus was engulfed in heavy silence as the man was escorted off. Outside, the officers pinned him against the hood of a patrol car, searching his hoodie pockets for an ID, anything that could tell them who he was. Noah remained seated, his heart still hammering, his eyes fixed on the girl, Haley. She was still trembling, her hands clutching the fabric of her shirt as if afraid to let go. As if she couldn't quite believe it was over. The female officer sat beside her, her voice gentle but firm. "Can you tell me your name?" Haley swallowed hard before whispering. "Haley? My name is Haley." "Haley, do you know that man?" She shook her head violently, her breath hitching. "He forced me into his car. I don't know who he is. I didn't know what to do." The officer nodded, her expression laced with quiet sympathy. But her tone remained steady. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." Noah felt a tightness in his chest. She had really been kidnapped. He swallowed hard and glanced out the window. The male officer had just received a call over his radio. His face grew visibly tense. And then, Noah heard the words that sent a chill down his spine. "We've been looking for him for 2 months. He's wanted in 2 other states for abduction." 2 states. Abduction. Noah felt frozen in place. If he hadn't noticed her signal, if he hadn't done anything, Haley might have become his next victim. And maybe, no one would have ever found her. Haley shuddered at the officer's words, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. The female officer turned toward Noah. She stepped closer and crouched to his eye level. "You were the one who called it in, weren't you?" Noah hesitated, then gave a small nod. The officer smiled, not just a look of gratitude, but something deeper, a quiet kind of pride. "You saved her life." The words hit Noah like a punch to the chest. He had saved someone. He turned to look at Haley, the girl he had only just met today. The girl who, without him, might have vanished forever. Haley lifted her gaze, her eyes brimming with tears, but beneath them was something else. "Gratitude. Thank you," she whispered. Noah didn't know what to say. He just nodded, feeling something swell inside him, a strange mix of relief, fear, and, most of all, pride. He had done the right thing. And if he ever had to do it again, he would. Noah still hadn't fully processed what had just happened. He stared out the bus window, watching the streetlights blur past. But his mind was trapped in the moments that had unfolded only minutes ago. He had almost done nothing. If he had ignored the signal, if he hadn't sent that text, if he had just sat there, convincing himself it wasn't his problem, Haley could have been gone. She could have been taken somewhere far away, just like the kidnapper's other victims. Maybe, one day, she would have only existed as a face on a missing persons report. But that didn't happen, because he had seen it. And he had acted. Outside, the officers were still talking over their radios, handling the aftermath. One of them walked over to Haley, his voice calm and professional. "We're going to contact your family. Do you remember their phone number?" Haley hesitated for a moment, then slowly nodded. The female officer pulled out a notepad, ready to write it down. Noah glanced at Haley. She was still shaken, but there was something else in her expression now, relief. She was still trembling, but she was alive, and Noah knew that was because of him. He had never thought that something so small, just a simple text, could change someone's fate. But it had. Without thinking, Haley turned to look at him. "How did you know?" Her voice was quiet, but the question hit Noah deep. He blinked. "What? How did you know it was a distress signal?" Noah took a breath. He remembered the random TikTok video he had watched months ago, a quick clip explaining the silent hand sign for help. He had scrolled past it without much thought at the time. But today, that small piece of knowledge had saved a life. "I saw it on TikTok," Noah admitted. "Just a random video, but I remembered." Haley held his gaze for a long moment, then gave a small nod. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked lighter, as if, for just a second, the weight of what had happened wasn't crushing her. Noah wanted to say something else. But at that moment, the male officer stepped back onto the bus. "He's been taken into custody," the officer announced. "We'll need statements from both of you." Noah nodded. He knew he'd have to recount everything, how he recognized the signal, how he texted 911, how he stalled for time. The police would need all the details. But to Noah, only one thing truly mattered. Haley was safe, and he had done the right thing. The bus kept moving, but for Noah, everything had changed. He stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur past. Yet his mind remained trapped in the events that had just unfolded. He had come so close to doing nothing. Just a little more hesitation, and he might have bowed his head, ignored the distress signal like everyone else on the bus. He had almost convinced himself that it wasn't his problem. But if he hadn't acted, Haley might have disappeared. She could have been swallowed by the same darkness as the victims before her. Her family might have spent years searching, never knowing what had happened. But that didn't happen, because Noah had seen, and he had acted. He thought about the other passengers, the woman glued to her phone, The man dozing off. The driver focused solely on the road. None of them had noticed what he had noticed. Or worse, maybe they had noticed and done nothing. And that was terrifying. How many people had been in Haley's place before? How many had sent out a silent cry for help, only to be ignored? How many had vanished, simply because no one had stopped to ask, "Are you okay?" Noah glanced down at his phone. The message to 911 was still there. Just 30 words. And those 30 words had changed everything. He took a deep breath, knowing one thing for certain. From this moment on, he would never ignore a call for help. He would never pretend it wasn't his concern. Because today, Noah had learned something important. Sometimes, all it takes to save a life is to care. If you see something suspicious, don't look away. Speak up. Report it. Help. Because you might be someone's last hope.